I still remember the exact moment my hand froze on the hotel door handle. Because on the other side of that door, I heard a sound no child should ever hear coming from their mother's room. It wasn't laughter. It wasn't crying. It was fear. A muffled voice. A sharp argument. Then something crashing to the floor. And in that moment, every childhood memory I had of my mother, her strength, her calm, her sacrifices, shattered like glass in my chest. I had come to surprise her. But what I discovered instead would change how I saw my mother forever. And if I had arrived just 5 minutes later, this story might have ended very differently. Who was inside that room with her? Why did my successful, respected mother sound afraid? And why did the hotel staff later tell me, your mother specifically asked us not to call anyone? As I stood there, heart pounding, one question burned through me: what was my mother hiding, and why? Before we go any further, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Trust me, you'll want to stay for what happens next. My mother was not an ordinary woman. She was the kind of woman people admired from a distance, a self-made business consultant, always traveling, always working, always carrying herself with dignity that seemed unshakable. Growing up in a small town in Wisconsin, I watched her transform from a grieving widow into one of the most respected business consultants in the Midwest. People used to say, your mother is strong. Nothing can shake her. And I believed that. I believed it with every fiber of my being because that's all I had ever seen. After my father died when I was 12 years old, she became everything. Provider, protector, teacher, disciplinarian, friend, counselor. She was all of it, wrapped into one person who never seemed to break, never seemed to falter, never seemed to need anyone. She never complained. Never cried in front of me. Never asked for help. Not once. Not ever. I watched her wake up at 5 in the morning, make breakfast while reviewing client files, drop me at school with a kiss on the forehead and words of encouragement, then drive 2 hours to meet clients in Milwaukee or Madison or Chicago. She built her consulting firm from absolutely nothing, working with small businesses across the Midwest, helping them grow, restructure, survive economic downturns and competitive pressures. Her reputation was spotless. People trusted her. Respected her. Sought her advice. And me? I was proud. So incredibly proud that sometimes I forgot she was human. I forgot that strength has limits. I forgot that even the strongest people have breaking points. My childhood wasn't typical, but it wasn't bad either. We had a modest house on Elm Street, a 2-story colonial with blue shutters that my mother painted herself one summer. She couldn't afford to hire someone, so she spent weekends on a ladder with paint cans and brushes, determined to make our house look cared for. That was her way. She never waited for someone to fix things. She just did it herself. Our neighborhood was quiet, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where Mrs. Patterson next door would bring over casseroles when she knew my mother was working late, where Mr. Chen across the street would shovel our driveway in winter without being asked. It was community. It was home. And my mother was the glue that held so much of it together, always organizing block parties, always volunteering at the school, always showing up even when she was exhausted. I remember once, when I was 14, I asked her, "Mom, don't you ever get tired?" She looked at me with this gentle smile and said, "Tired is just a feeling, sweetheart. It passes. But giving up lasts forever." That stuck with me. That philosophy of relentless perseverance became the lens through which I understood my mother. She was unstoppable. Unbreakable. Or so I thought. When she told me she was traveling to Chicago for a major business deal, a potential partnership that could triple her revenue and expand her consulting firm into new markets, I didn't think twice. She sounded excited on the phone. Confident. Animated in a way I hadn't heard in months. This could change everything, she said. This partnership could take the company to the next level. We'd be working with Fortune 500 clients, major corporations, real transformative work. I could hear the hope in her voice, the anticipation. After years of grinding, of building her business one small client at a time, this felt like her big break. Her moment. The opportunity she had been working toward for over a decade. But something inside me felt uneasy. Maybe it was the way her voice lingered on certain words. Or how she ended the call quickly, almost abruptly, saying, "Don't worry about me. Focus on your life, your career, your future." That phrase stuck with me. Lodged itself in my brain like a splinter. Because my mother never said things like that. She never told me not to worry. She just handled things. Quietly. Efficiently. Alone. That's why I decided to surprise her. Not because she asked. But because a child knows when something feels off. Because despite her words of confidence, I heard something else underneath. Something I couldn't quite name but couldn't ignore either. The decision wasn't impulsive, though it might have seemed that way. I had been working as a marketing coordinator at a tech startup in Minneapolis, a job I loved but that consumed most of my time and energy. My days were filled with campaign launches, client meetings, content creation, analytics reviews. I was good at it. Really good. My boss had recently hinted at a promotion, and I was working extra hours to prove I deserved it. But that phone call with my mother stayed with me. For 3 days, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I replayed the conversation in my head during meetings, while eating lunch at my desk, while lying in bed at night staring at the ceiling. Her voice. The slight tremor I thought I heard. The way she rushed off the phone. "Focus on your life," she had said. As if hers didn't matter. As if she was already compartmentalizing herself away from me. On the 3rd day, I made the decision. I walked into my boss's office and said I had a family emergency. He looked concerned and told me to take whatever time I needed. I felt guilty lying, but it wasn't entirely a lie, was it? Something in my gut told me this wasn't just about surprising her. It was about checking on her. Making sure she was okay. Making sure the woman who had held everything together for so many years wasn't finally cracking under the weight of it all. I booked a last-minute flight that evening. The ticket was expensive, ridiculously expensive for someone on my salary, but I didn't care. I threw clothes into a duffel bag, called a rideshare to the airport, and sat on the plane with my heart racing, not entirely sure what I was doing or what I would find. The flight was only an hour, but it felt eternal. I stared out the window at the clouds, at the patchwork of farmland below, and wondered what I would say when I showed up at her hotel. "Surprise, Mom. I was worried about you, so I flew across state lines to check on you." It sounded absurd even in my own head. But the feeling wouldn't go away. That gnawing, persistent intuition that something was very, very wrong. When the plane landed at O'Hare, I took the train into the city, then a cab to the hotel. My mother had mentioned the name in passing during our call, the Riverside Business Hotel, one of those mid-range places catering to corporate travelers. I had looked it up online. 3 stars. Clean. Functional. Nothing special. The kind of place where business deals happen over continental breakfasts and conference calls are taken in beige hallways. I arrived late in the evening, around 8:30. The lobby was quiet. Too quiet. A few business travelers sat scattered in armchairs, staring at laptops or phones, the universal posture of people waiting for something. The front desk clerk was a young woman, probably in her mid-20s, with tired eyes and a practiced smile. "Can I help you?" she asked. "Yes, I'm here to see a guest. Margaret Foster. She's in room." I realized I didn't know the room number. "I'm her daughter. Can you tell me what room she's in?" The clerk hesitated. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. "Are you family?" I just said I'm her daughter. She nodded slowly, but something in her expression shifted. A flicker of concern. Or maybe recognition. Room 312. Third floor. Thank you. As I turned toward the elevators, she called out, "Miss?" I looked back. "Your mother, she specifically asked us not to call anyone if there were any disturbances." My stomach dropped. Disturbances? What kind of disturbances? The clerk glanced around nervously. I probably shouldn't have said anything. Just, "If you're checking on her, that's good. That's really good." She didn't explain further. Just gave me a look that said more than words could. I stepped into the elevator with my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The elevator seemed to move in slow motion. Each floor dinged past. First floor. Second floor. My reflection stared back at me in the mirrored walls, a young woman with wide eyes and tense shoulders, gripping a duffel bag like it was a life raft. What was I walking into? What had the clerk meant by disturbances? Had my mother been in trouble before tonight? Had she called for help? Had someone hurt her? The questions multiplied faster than I could process them. Third floor. The doors opened. The hallway stretched out before me, long and dimly lit, with that generic hotel carpet pattern that looks the same in every mid-range hotel across America. Beige walls. Numbered doors. Silence. Except it wasn't silent. As I walked down the hallway toward room 312, I heard something. Voices. Muffled but distinct. A man's voice. Angry. Not shouting, but that controlled kind of anger that's somehow more frightening because it's measured. Calculated. Dangerous. Then my mother spoke. And for the first time in my entire life, she sounded small. Scared. Not like the woman who faced down aggressive clients, who negotiated tough contracts, who rebuilt her life from ashes. This was different. This was fear. My body moved before my mind could fully process what was happening. I walked faster. Then I heard it. A loud crash. Like something heavy hitting the floor. Glass breaking. Shattering. My heart stopped. I started running. The duffel bag slipped off my shoulder and hit the floor, but I didn't care. I reached room 312 and pounded on the door. "Mom. Mom, it's me. Open the door." No answer. Just silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. I knocked again, harder this time, louder. My fist hurt, but I didn't stop. "Mom. I know you're in there. Open the door right now." I heard footsteps. Slow. Hesitant. Someone was moving inside. Then the chain lock rattled. The deadbolt clicked. The door opened just a crack. Just enough for me to see my mother's face. And what I saw made my blood run cold. My mother stood there, eyes wide, face pale, almost ghostly in the dim hotel light. Her hair, usually neat and professional, pulled back in a tight bun or elegant twist, was disheveled. Strands hung loose around her face. There was a red mark on her wrist. Fresh. Angry. Like someone had grabbed her. Hard. She whispered, "Why are you here?" Not, "Sweetheart, what a wonderful surprise." Not, "Oh my goodness, I can't believe you came." Just, "Why are you here?" Like my presence was a problem. Like I had walked into something I shouldn't have seen. Before I could answer, before I could ask if she was okay, before I could demand to know what was happening, a figure moved behind her. A man stepped into view. Tall, probably 6 feet or more. Well dressed in expensive slacks and a button-down shirt, sleeves rolled up to his elbows. Dark hair graying at the temples. Maybe 50, maybe older. His face was composed. Calm. Too calm given what I had just heard. And he smiled. Actually smiled. That smile was wrong. Everything about it was wrong. It didn't reach his eyes. It was the smile of someone who knew they had power and enjoyed using it. "You must be the daughter," he said. His voice was smooth. Practiced. Like he'd rehearsed this moment. Like he'd been expecting me. Or expecting someone. "I've heard a lot about you." I looked at my mother. Her eyes were pleading. Not with words, but with expression. Begging me to leave. To walk away. To pretend I hadn't seen anything. But I couldn't. I wouldn't. I pushed the door open wider and stepped inside, ignoring my mother's sharp intake of breath, ignoring the protest forming on her lips. The hotel room looked like a hurricane had passed through. Papers scattered across the desk and floor. A lamp knocked over. The coffee table pushed askew. And on the floor near the window, shattered glass from what looked like a drinking glass or vase. The man didn't move. He just stood there, watching me with that same unsettling smile, hands in his pockets like he was casually observing an interesting social experiment. "Who are you?" I demanded. My voice came out stronger than I felt. My mother stepped forward. "Sweetheart, this isn't, you shouldn't be here. This is just business. Everything is fine." "Everything is clearly not fine, Mom." "Who is this man? Why is there broken glass on the floor? Why do you have a mark on your wrist?" The man chuckled. Actually chuckled. A low, amused sound that made my skin crawl. "Your mother is right. This is just business. Sometimes business negotiations get a little heated. But we're professionals. We know how to handle it. You didn't answer my question. Who are you?" He extended his hand like we were at a networking event. "Name's Richard. Richard Blackwell. Your mother and I are business partners. Or we're about to be, once we finalize some details." I didn't take his hand. I didn't move. I just stared at him with every ounce of distrust I could muster. Business partners don't leave marks on each other. Business partners don't make someone sound terrified through a closed door. "Get out." His smile faltered. Just slightly. Just enough for me to see a flash of something darker underneath. Irritation. Maybe anger. "Excuse me. You heard me. Get out of this room. Now." He looked at my mother, not me. "Margaret, are you going to let your daughter speak to me this way? After everything we've discussed? After all the opportunities I'm offering you?" My mother's voice was barely a whisper. "Richard, please. Just go. We can finish this tomorrow." "Tomorrow?" He laughed again, but this time there was no humor in it. Just mockery. "Tomorrow you were supposed to sign the contracts. Tomorrow you were supposed to formalize our partnership. But now your daughter shows up and suddenly you want to delay. That's not how this works, Margaret. You know that." I said get out. I stepped between him and my mother. I'm not a large person. 5'5", average build, nothing physically intimidating. But I was done being polite. Done being civil. My mother had raised me to be respectful, but she'd also raised me to stand up for what's right. And this was wrong. Everything about this was wrong. Richard looked at me like I was an insect. Annoying but inconsequential. "You have no idea what you're interfering with, little girl. Your mother and I have an agreement. A very lucrative agreement that will benefit both of us. But it requires trust. Commitment. Things that are apparently in short supply tonight. Call me little girl again and see what happens," I said quietly. For a moment, genuine surprise crossed his face. Like he wasn't used to being challenged. Especially not by a woman half his age. Then he straightened his shoulders, adjusted his sleeves, and grabbed his suit jacket from the back of a chair. "Fine. We'll resume this conversation tomorrow, Margaret. 10 o'clock. Don't be late." And come alone. He walked past me, so close I could smell his cologne. Expensive. Overwhelming. Nauseating. The kind of scent that announces wealth and self-importance. When his hand brushed my shoulder, I flinched. He paused at the door and looked back one more time. Think carefully about what you're risking, he said to my mother. This opportunity won't come again. Then he left. The door closed behind him with a soft click that somehow felt louder than a slam. For several seconds, neither my mother nor I moved. We just stood there in that destroyed hotel room, breathing hard, processing what had just happened. Then my mother's legs seemed to give out. She sank onto the edge of the bed, hands trembling, face buried in her palms. I locked the door. Checked it twice. Then I turned to my mother. Mom. Talk to me. What is going on? Who was that man? She didn't answer right away. Just sat there, shoulders shaking slightly, making no sound. I'd seen my mother cry exactly 3 times in my life. Once at my father's funeral. Once when I graduated high school. And once when her own mother, my grandmother, passed away. This wasn't crying. This was something deeper. This was the kind of silent breakdown that happens when someone has been holding it together for too long and the dam finally cracks. I sat down next to her and gently pulled her hands away from her face. Mom. Look at me. Please. She looked up. Her eyes were red but dry. Like she was too exhausted even for tears. I didn't want you to see this, she whispered. I never wanted you to see any of this. See what? You need to tell me what's happening. Right now. No more secrets. She took a deep breath. The kind of breath someone takes before jumping off a cliff, knowing there's no going back. His name is Richard Blackwell. And he's not just a business partner. Then what is he? He's someone from my past. From before your father. Those words hung in the air like smoke. Heavy. Suffocating. What do you mean, before Dad? My mother stood up and walked to the window. The view overlooked downtown Chicago, city lights twinkling in the darkness, cars moving in streams below like blood through veins. She stared out at it, arms wrapped around herself. I met Richard 25 years ago. I was young. Just out of college. Working my first real job at a consulting firm in Milwaukee. He was one of the senior partners. Charismatic. Successful. Charming. She paused. We were involved. Briefly. I felt like the floor had tilted. Involved how? We dated for about 8 months. He was older, more established. I thought I was in love. But Richard was complicated. Controlling. He wanted to manage every aspect of my life. Where I worked, who I spent time with, what I wore, what I said. At first, I thought it was romantic. Like he cared so much about me. But then it became suffocating. What happened? I ended it. Told him I couldn't be in a relationship where I had no freedom, no voice. He didn't take it well. Started showing up at my apartment. Calling constantly. Making scenes at work. Eventually, I quit my job and moved to Madison. Started over. And that's where I met your father. She turned back to face me. Your dad was everything Richard wasn't. Kind. Supportive. He encouraged me to start my own business, to build something of my own. We got married. Had you? Built a life. And I thought Richard was in the past. Forgotten. Done. But he's not, I said quietly. She shook her head. 6 months ago, he contacted me. Sent an email through my business website. Said he'd been following my career. Was impressed with what I'd built. Wanted to discuss a potential partnership. I almost deleted it. Almost blocked him. But then he laid out this incredible opportunity. His firm had connections with major corporations. Fortune 500 companies. He said he could open doors I'd never be able to open on my own. All I had to do was merge my business with his under a partnership agreement. And you believed him? I wanted to believe him, she said. I wanted to believe people can change. That maybe he'd grown up, matured, become a different person. And the opportunity seemed real. He introduced me to some of his clients. Set up meetings. Everything looked legitimate. So what went wrong? Everything, she whispered. I started noticing inconsistencies. Documents that didn't match what we discussed verbally. Contract terms that seemed to give him far more control than we'd agreed to. When I questioned him, he'd get defensive. Then angry. Then he'd smooth it over with apologies and explanations that sort of made sense but didn't really. And I realized, too late, that this wasn't about a business partnership. This was about control. Just like 25 years ago. My mother walked back to the bed and sat down heavily, like carrying the weight of this story was physically exhausting. I stayed quiet, giving her space to continue. She needed to get this out. All of it. About 3 months ago, things escalated, she continued. Richard started making demands. Said I needed to sign over 50% ownership of my company to formalize the partnership. I refused. Told him I'd built this business from nothing and I wasn't giving up control. That's when he changed tactics. What do you mean? He started threatening me. Not overtly at first. Just subtle comments. It would be a shame if your clients knew about your past. I have documents that could raise questions about your business practices. You should think carefully about making me an enemy. Things like that. I felt rage building in my chest. That's blackmail. Yes, she said simply. But I didn't know what to do. He had resources I didn't have. Connections. Lawyers. Money. And I was afraid that if I fought back, he'd follow through on his threats and destroy everything I'd worked for. So I tried to manage him. Tried to negotiate. Tried to find a way out that didn't involve completely burning the bridge. That's why you came to Chicago, I said. It wasn't a question. She nodded. He said we needed to finalize everything this week. Face to face. Said if I didn't sign the partnership agreement by tomorrow, he'd go public with false information. Forged documents that make it look like I've been defrauding my clients. Fake email chains showing me agreeing to unethical business practices. He said he'd send everything to my biggest clients, to industry associations, to the media. He'd destroy my reputation so completely that I'd never work again. Mom, why didn't you call the police? Why didn't you call me? Why didn't you tell anyone what was happening? She looked at me with exhausted eyes. Because I've been surviving alone my whole life. Because after your father died, I had to be strong. I had to be the one who had all the answers, who never broke down, who handled everything. And somewhere along the way, I forgot how to ask for help. I forgot that it was okay to need someone. I thought I could handle Richard myself. I thought I could outmaneuver him, outsmart him, find a solution. But tonight. Her voice broke. Tonight I realized I was wrong. Tonight, when he came to my room and started demanding I sign the papers, when he grabbed my wrist and broke the glass and told me I had no choice, I realized I was in over my head. But I still didn't know how to ask for help. I reached over and took her hand. The one with the red mark. Gently. You don't have to ask, Mom. I'm here now. And we're going to fix this. How? She asked. The word came out hollow. Defeated. I don't know yet. But we will. First, we need to document that mark on your wrist. Take photos. You're going to tell me everything Richard said tonight, everything he threatened. And tomorrow, we're not meeting him alone. We're going to the police. She shook her head. It's not that simple. He hasn't technically done anything illegal. It's all threats and pressure. And the forged documents look real. If I accuse him and he releases those documents, it could still destroy me even if they're eventually proven fake. The damage would be done. So we let him win. I don't know what else to do. I stood up and started pacing. My mind was racing, trying to find a solution, trying to see a way through this mess. Then something occurred to me. You said he's been doing this for 3 months. Do you have any proof? Any documentation of his threats? Some emails. Some text messages. Nothing concrete enough to prove coercion. What about recordings? Have you recorded any of your meetings? My mother's expression shifted. Just slightly. A flicker of something I couldn't quite read. Actually, she said slowly. There's something I haven't told you yet. What? She walked over to her purse and pulled out her phone. She opened an app. A voice recording app. And the screen showed over 30 files. All labeled with dates. Some going back months. What is this? I asked. She met my eyes. I've been recording everything. Every meeting. Every phone call. Every threat. Every conversation. Everything. I stared at her. You've been recording him? For 3 months. Since the day I realized what he was really doing. Since the day I understood this wasn't about business but about control. Mom, why didn't you tell me this earlier? Because this isn't just about protecting myself, she said quietly. It's bigger than that. My mother sat back down and pulled up one of the recordings. Her hands were steadier now. Like revealing this secret had given her back some of her strength. Listen to this, she said. She played a recording from 6 weeks ago. Richard's voice filled the room, that same smooth, controlled tone I'd heard tonight. Margaret, you need to understand something. I've done this before. Successfully. Multiple times. You're not the first businesswoman I've partnered with, and you won't be the last. The pattern is simple. I identify successful independent consultants, usually women, usually in vulnerable positions. I offer them opportunities they can't refuse. We form partnerships. And eventually, they sign over control because it's easier than fighting me. By the time they realize what's happening, it's too late. My mother's voice on the recording, smaller, uncertain. You're saying you've deliberately targeted other women? Targeted is such an ugly word. Let's say I've identified opportunities. And yes, most of my partners have been women because, frankly, women are easier to manipulate in business contexts. Society conditions you to be accommodating. Polite. Non-confrontational. It makes the process much smoother. That's predatory. That's business. The recording ended. I felt sick. He admitted to doing this to other women. I said. My mother nodded. That recording is from a lunch meeting we had in Milwaukee. He had a few drinks and got cocky. Started bragging about his strategy. I don't think he realized I was recording. Or maybe he thought I was too intimidated to ever do anything with it. Have you identified the other women? 2 of them, she said. I did some research. Found 2 other female business owners who had briefly partnered with Richard before their businesses mysteriously failed or were absorbed into his company. I reached out to them. Carefully. Anonymously at first. Both were terrified to talk. One eventually agreed to meet with me. She told me her story. It was almost identical to mine. The smooth offer. The partnership. The increasing demands. The threats. The forged documents. By the time she tried to fight back, he'd destroyed her credibility. She lost everything. Her business. Her reputation. Her savings. Everything. And the other woman? She wouldn't meet in person. Too afraid. But she sent me a letter. Describing the same pattern. The same tactics. She said she tried to go to the police but couldn't prove coercion. Everything Richard does is carefully constructed to look legitimate. By the time you realize you're being manipulated, you're already compromised. He's very, very good at this. I sat down hard on the desk chair. My mind was reeling. So this has been his business model for years. Targeting successful women, manipulating them into partnerships, then taking over their businesses. Essentially, yes, my mother said. And I realized three things. First, I needed evidence. Not just of what he was doing to me, but of the pattern. Second, I needed to be smart about how I fought back. If I went to the police prematurely with incomplete evidence, he'd just deny everything and release his forged documents. I'd lose anyway. And third, I needed to protect those other women. They were too afraid to come forward on their own. But if I could build a strong enough case, if I could expose Richard publicly with undeniable proof, maybe they'd feel safe enough to add their voices. That's why you kept meeting with him, I said. Understanding dawning. That's why you kept playing along. You were gathering evidence. I was building a case, she confirmed. Not just for me. For all of us. I contacted a lawyer. Quietly. An attorney who specializes in business fraud and coercion. Her name is Patricia Chen. She's been helping me document everything. She's the one who suggested I record all our interactions. She's been reviewing the forged documents Richard created, identifying the forgeries, building a timeline. Does Richard know about any of this? I don't think so, my mother said. I've been very careful. I've played the role of the intimidated businesswoman. I've let him think he's winning. I've shown up to meetings, listened to his demands, acted uncertain and afraid. Because as long as he thinks he has the upper hand, he keeps talking. He keeps revealing things. He keeps creating evidence. But tonight something went wrong, I said. She nodded. Tonight he pushed harder than he ever has before. He came to my room instead of meeting in a public space. He brought the final partnership agreement and told me I had to sign it tonight. When I tried to delay, tried to say I needed more time to review with my own attorney, he got aggressive. Grabbed my wrist. Started making direct threats about what he'd do if I didn't sign. I kept recording, but I was genuinely scared. He's never been physically intimidating before. That was new. That was a line crossing. And then I showed up, I said. And you didn't want me involved because you were afraid Richard would see me as a complication. Someone who could threaten his plans. I was afraid he'd hurt you, she said simply. I was afraid if he knew you were aware of the situation, he'd target you too. Or use you against me. But now that you're here, now that you've seen him, now that he knows you exist. She trailed off. We need to call your lawyer, I said. Right now. Tonight. We need to tell her what happened and figure out our next steps. My mother nodded and pulled up Patricia Chen's contact information. It was almost 11 o'clock at night, but my mother said Patricia had told her to call any time if there was an emergency. She put the call on speaker. Patricia answered on the third ring. Margaret? Are you all right? Her voice was alert, professional, concerned. I'm okay, my mother said. But Richard came to my hotel room tonight. It got physical. And my daughter showed up unexpectedly. The situation has escalated. Tell me everything, Patricia said. For the next 20 minutes, my mother recounted the evening. Patricia listened without interrupting, occasionally making small sounds of acknowledgement. When my mother finished, there was a brief pause. Okay, Patricia said. This is actually good. Good? I said. How is any of this good? Because he crossed a line, Patricia explained. Physical intimidation, grabbing her wrist, threatening her in her hotel room, these are actions we can work with. Margaret, did you record tonight's interaction? Yes, my mother said. All of it. Excellent. And your daughter witnessed some of it? I witnessed the aftermath, I said. I heard the argument through the door. I saw my mother's wrist. I confronted Richard directly. Even better, Patricia said. Here's what I need you to do. First, Margaret, I need you to photograph that mark on your wrist. Multiple angles. Time-stamped. Second, I need both of you to write down everything that happened tonight while it's fresh. Every detail. What was said, what was done, timeline, everything. Third, do not meet with Richard tomorrow. Do not respond to his calls or messages. Do not engage at all. He said I had to meet him at 10 o'clock, my mother said. If I don't show up, he'll follow through on his threats. Let him try, Patricia said. There was steel in her voice. We're done playing defense. It's time to go on offense. Margaret, you've been gathering evidence for 3 months. We have recordings of him admitting to targeting other women. We have documentation of his coercion tactics. We have his forged documents, which my forensic accountant has already analyzed and can testify are fraudulent. We have testimony from at least one other victim who's willing to come forward. And now we have evidence of physical intimidation. That's enough to go to the authorities. Which authorities? I asked. We're going to file a police report for assault and harassment, Patricia said. We're also going to file a formal complaint with the Illinois Attorney General's Office for fraud and coercion. And we're going to reach out to the FBI because this crosses state lines and involves a pattern of business fraud targeting multiple victims. This isn't just a civil case anymore. Richard Blackwell has committed crimes. Multiple crimes. And we're going to make sure he answers for them. I felt hope rising in my chest for the first time all night. How long will all this take? We can start first thing tomorrow morning, Patricia said. I'll meet you at your hotel at 8 o'clock. We'll go together to file the police report. I've already been in preliminary contact with an assistant attorney general who's interested in the case. Once we file the formal complaints and turn over all the evidence, things will move quickly. Richard won't know what hit him. What if he releases those forged documents before we can stop him? My mother asked. Then we demonstrate their forgeries, Patricia said. I have expert testimony. Ready. We have forensic analysis. We have the originals that show what the documents actually said before he altered them. If he releases them, it will only strengthen our case against him because it will show consciousness of guilt and an attempt to intimidate a witness. Honestly, Margaret, the best thing he could do for our case right now is follow through on his threats. It would seal his fate. My mother let out a long breath. Like she'd been holding it for months and could finally exhale. I can't believe this might actually be over soon. It will be over, Patricia said firmly. And not just for you. Once this becomes public, once the authorities investigate, I believe more victims will come forward. Richard Blackwell has been doing this for years, probably decades. But it ends now. You made that possible by being brave enough to gather evidence instead of just running away. You should be proud of yourself. After we hung up, my mother and I sat in silence for a moment. The hotel room suddenly felt different. Less like a trap and more like a turning point. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner, my mother said quietly. I'm sorry I let you think I didn't need you. I'm sorry I didn't knock on your door sooner, I replied. Not just tonight. But all those years. All those times you were struggling and I just assumed you had it handled because you always seemed so strong. Strength isn't what I thought it was, she said. I thought being strong meant never asking for help. Never showing weakness. Never admitting I was scared or overwhelmed or in over my head. But that's not strength. That's just isolation wearing a mask. Neither of us slept much that night. We spent hours documenting everything. I wrote down my account of what I'd witnessed, what I'd heard, what Richard had said. My mother went through all her recordings, organizing them chronologically, adding notes about context and what had happened before and after each recording. We photographed her wrist from multiple angles. The mark had actually gotten darker as the night went on, a clear imprint of fingers where Richard had grabbed her. By 3 in the morning, we had compiled a comprehensive document. Timeline. Evidence. Witness statements. Recordings. Everything organized and ready to present. You should have been a lawyer, I told my mother as she finished formatting the final document. She smiled slightly. I thought about it once. Back in college. But then I got interested in business instead. Funny how life works out. It's not too late, I said. You're only 52. People go to law school at all ages. Maybe, she said. Or maybe I'll just focus on helping other women avoid what happened to me. There should be resources. Support networks. Ways to identify predatory business practices before it's too late. That's a good idea, I said. You could start a nonprofit. Use your experience to protect others. We finally fell asleep around 4 in the morning, both of us fully clothed on top of the hotel beds, too exhausted to even change into pajamas. Patricia Chen arrived at exactly 8 o'clock, as promised. She was a small woman, probably 5 feet tall, with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and an air of absolute competence. She carried a leather briefcase and wore a navy suit that screamed, "Don't underestimate me." "Margaret," she said, shaking my mother's hand. Then she turned to me. "You must be the daughter. Thank you for being here. Family support makes a tremendous difference in cases like this." We went over everything one more time. Patricia reviewed our documentation, listened to key portions of the recordings, examined the photographs. She made notes in a legal pad with precise handwriting. "This is excellent work," she said. "Very thorough. The recordings alone would be damaging, but combined with everything else, this paints a clear picture of systematic fraud and coercion. Richard made a critical mistake by targeting you, Margaret." "Why is that?" my mother asked. "Because you fought back," Patricia said simply. Most of his victims were too traumatized or too afraid to gather evidence. They just wanted to escape. But you turned the tables. You documented everything. And that's going to bring him down. We left the hotel at 9 o'clock and went directly to the nearest police station. Patricia had already contacted them and they were expecting us. The detective assigned to the case was a woman named Sarah Martinez. She was maybe 40, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She listened to my mother's statement, reviewed the evidence, asked clarifying questions. She was particularly interested in the recordings. "This is highly unusual," Detective Martinez said. "Most coercion cases are he said she said. But you have him on tape admitting to targeting multiple women. Admitting his strategy. That's going to make this case very straightforward. Will you arrest him?" I asked. "Not immediately," she said. "We need to build the full case first. But I'm going to bring him in for questioning this afternoon. Once he realizes we have this evidence, he'll likely lawyer up. But the investigation will proceed. And yes, based on what I'm seeing here, I fully expect charges will be filed. Multiple charges. Assault. Harassment. Fraud. Possibly racketeering if we can establish an ongoing pattern of criminal enterprise." "How long will this take?" my mother asked. "A few weeks to build the full case," Detective Martinez said. "But here's what's going to happen today. I'm going to contact Mr. Blackwell and ask him to come in for an interview. I'm going to make it clear that we're investigating allegations of business fraud and coercion. That alone will probably be enough to make him back off from you. Most bullies fold when they realize they're actually going to face consequences. If you're still watching at this point, drop a comment with, "I'm still here." Let's see who's truly following this shocking story. And stay tuned, because what happens next will leave you speechless. Patricia Chen also filed complaints with the Illinois Attorney General's office that morning. She had already been in preliminary discussions with them about Richard's pattern of behavior, and now with the new evidence and the police report, they moved quickly to open a formal investigation. By noon, Richard's world was starting to collapse, though he didn't know it yet. My mother received 3 text messages from him between 9 and 11 o'clock. The first was polite. "Margaret, you missed our meeting. Please call me." The second was concerned. "I'm worried about you. Is everything all right? We need to finalize these documents." The third was threatening. "Your silence is very disappointing. I hope you understand the consequences of breaking our agreement. I have no choice but to move forward with Plan B." Patricia told my mother not to respond to any of them. "Let him dig his own grave," she said. At 2 o'clock that afternoon, Detective Martinez called. "I brought Richard Blackwell in for questioning," she said. "He came with his lawyer." Predictable. But what's interesting is how he reacted when I told him we have recordings of his conversations with you. "What did he say?" my mother asked. "He tried to play it cool at first. Said any recordings would be taken out of context. Said everything he did was legitimate business practices. But when I played him the recording where he admits to targeting multiple women, his lawyer's face went white. She actually requested a private conference with her client. They were in there for 20 minutes. When they came out, she said they weren't answering any more questions." "Does that mean he's guilty?" I asked. Detective Martinez smiled slightly. "It means his lawyer knows he's in serious trouble. No attorney would shut down an interview like that unless they realized their client had said incriminating things on tape. Here's what's going to happen next. The Attorney General's office is going to subpoena Richard's business records. They're going to trace his financial dealings with all his partners over the past 10 years. They're going to identify every woman he's done this to. And they're going to build a case that shows a pattern of predatory business practices. This is going to be big." "How big?" Patricia asked. "Multi-state investigation big," Detective Martinez said. "We've already identified 2 other victims in Wisconsin and 1 in Iowa. The FBI is interested because it involves wire fraud and crosses state lines. Richard Blackwell thought he was untouchable. He thought he could keep doing this forever. But he picked the wrong woman to mess with this time." My mother's eyes filled with tears. "Those other women. Will they be okay?" "They'll have a chance to tell their stories now," Detective Martinez said. "Because of you. Because you were brave enough to gather evidence and come forward. You gave them a voice." The next week was a blur. My mother and I stayed in Chicago, though we moved to a different hotel. Patricia advised us not to return home until the initial phase of the investigation was complete. We spent our days meeting with investigators, reviewing evidence, making statements. The Attorney General's office was incredibly thorough. They brought in forensic accountants to examine Richard's business dealings. They brought in tech experts to analyze the forged documents and trace when and how they were created. They interviewed Richard's current and former employees. And slowly, inevitably, the full scope of his operation became clear. Over the course of 15 years, Richard Blackwell had targeted at least 12 women. All successful. All independent business owners. All at vulnerable points in their careers where the promise of major corporate connections seemed too good to pass up. His pattern was always the same. Initial contact. Flattery. Opportunity. Partnership agreement. Increasing demands. Threats. Forged documents. And ultimately, either the woman signed over her business to avoid public destruction, or she walked away with nothing, her reputation in ruins. He had refined the process to an art form. The two women my mother had identified both agreed to come forward once they learned there was a real investigation. One of them, a woman named Jennifer Rodriguez, flew to Chicago to meet us. She was maybe 60 years old, with gray hair and tired eyes that had seen too much. I lost everything to him, she told us over coffee in our hotel restaurant. My business. My savings. My confidence. For years, I blamed myself. Thought I'd been stupid to trust him. Stupid to sign documents without reading them carefully enough. Stupid to believe someone like him could actually want to help me. It wasn't your fault, my mother said gently. He's a professional manipulator. This is what he does. I know that now, Jennifer said. But for a long time, I didn't. I just thought I'd failed. My family thought I'd failed. I was too ashamed to tell anyone the truth about what really happened. I just let people assume I'd made bad business decisions. How long ago was this? I asked. 8 years, she said. 8 years and I'm still rebuilding. Still trying to recover financially and emotionally. When your mother reached out to me a month ago, I almost didn't respond. I was too afraid. Afraid Richard would come after me again. Afraid no one would believe me. Afraid I'd just be re-traumatized for nothing. But then I thought about other women who might be going through what I went through. And I couldn't stay silent anymore. The other woman, Patricia Williams, couldn't meet in person. She was too afraid. But she agreed to give a recorded testimony to investigators. Her story was heartbreaking. Richard had targeted her 7 years ago when she was going through a divorce. He had positioned himself as a supporter, someone who believed in her when her personal life was falling apart. The partnership had seemed like a lifeline. By the time she realized what was happening, she had signed over 60% of her business and was trapped in a contract that gave Richard control over every major decision. When she tried to fight back, he threatened to reveal personal information about her divorce, information he had learned during their friendly conversations. Information he shouldn't have known and definitely shouldn't have used as leverage. She had walked away from her business entirely rather than continue fighting him. Started over from scratch in a different industry. There are probably more, Patricia Chen said after we'd interviewed both women. These are just the ones we've identified so far. Richard has been doing this for over a decade. There could be 20 victims. 30. We won't know until the full investigation is complete. Will they all come forward? I asked. Patricia shook her head. Probably not. Some will be too afraid. Some will have moved on and won't want to relive the trauma. Some might not even realize they were victims. Richard was very good at making women blame themselves. But the ones who do come forward will be enough. We only need to prove the pattern. And we already have that. Richard didn't go quietly. 3 days after Detective Martinez questioned him, his lawyer released a statement to the media. It was carefully worded, clearly crafted to avoid admitting anything while still trying to control the narrative. The statement claimed that Richard Blackwell was a respected businessman who had helped numerous entrepreneurs grow their companies. It suggested that some disgruntled former partners were making false accusations because their businesses had failed due to their own mismanagement, not due to anything Richard had done. It hinted at legal action against individuals spreading defamatory lies. The statement never mentioned my mother by name. But it didn't need to. The implication was clear. Patricia Chen called immediately after the statement went public. Ignore it, she said. This is a classic deflection tactic. He's trying to intimidate you into backing down. It won't work. The evidence is too strong. But the statement had an effect anyway. That evening, my mother received an anonymous email. No name. No signature. Just a message. Drop the accusations or the forged documents go public. You have 24 hours. I watched my mother read it. Her hand trembled slightly. He's bluffing, I said. He has to be. Detective Martinez said releasing those documents would only hurt his case. I know, my mother said. But 25 years ago, he followed through on his threats. He made scenes at my work. He showed up at my apartment. He didn't stop until I physically moved to a different city. What if he's not bluffing this time? Patricia's response, when we forwarded her the email, was immediate and firm. Forward this to Detective Martinez right now. This is witness intimidation. This is obstruction of justice. Richard just committed another crime, and he was stupid enough to do it in writing. This actually helps our case. We forwarded the email. Detective Martinez called 30 minutes later. We're tracing the email now, she said. But even if it came from a burner account or a VPN, the timing is incredibly suspicious. Right after our investigation becomes known, your mother receives an anonymous threatening email. That's not a coincidence. And it shows consciousness of guilt. Richard knows he's in trouble and he's panicking. Should we be worried about our safety? I asked. There was a pause. I don't think Richard is physically dangerous, Detective Martinez said carefully. His MO is psychological manipulation, not violence. But I'm going to have patrol units increase their presence around your hotel as a precaution. And I want you both to document any further contact, any suspicious behavior, anything that feels off. If you see Richard in person, do not engage. Call me immediately. That night, neither my mother nor I slept well again. Every sound in the hotel hallway made us jump. Every notification on our phones made our hearts race. Fear is a strange thing. Even when you know logically that you're safer than you were before, even when you know the authorities are involved and the truth is coming out, your body still responds to the memory of threat. The breakthrough came 5 days after we filed the police report. Detective Martinez called us to come to the police station. When we arrived, she had a satisfied expression. We found something, she said. Something big. She led us to a conference room where multiple folders and a laptop were spread across the table. Richard Blackwell kept records, she said. Detailed records of every woman he targeted. Names. Businesses. Timelines. Notes about their vulnerabilities. Strategies he used to manipulate them. Financial tracking of how much money he extracted from each one. He kept it all in an encrypted cloud storage account. How did you get access? Patricia asked. His former assistant came forward, Detective Martinez said. A woman named Lisa Chen who worked for him for 6 years. She reached out to us after she heard about the investigation. Said she'd had suspicions for years about what Richard was doing but was too afraid to speak up. When she heard other women were coming forward, she decided she couldn't stay silent anymore. She had the password to his storage account because she was the one who set it up for him. What's in the records? My mother asked. Detective Martinez opened the laptop and turned it toward us. On the screen was a spreadsheet. Rows and rows of data. Names. Dates. Amounts. This is 15 years of systematic fraud, she said. Richard documented everything. I think he thought of it as some kind of trophy system. Proof of his success. But what he actually created was a confession. I leaned forward to read the screen. The spreadsheet had columns labeled Target, Initial Contact, Partnership Established, Control Achieved, Profit Extracted, and Status. Under my mother's name, it said, In Progress. The Profit Extracted column was empty. But above her were 11 other names. The profits ranged from $200,000 to over $1 million. He made millions doing this, I said quietly. Over $8 million total, Detective Martinez confirmed. That we can document. There might be more. We're still going through all the records. But this alone is enough to prove criminal conspiracy, fraud, and racketeering. Richard Blackwell is going to prison. My mother's eyes were fixed on the screen. These women. All these women. Does this mean they can get their money back? We're going to try, Patricia said. Once Richard is convicted, we can pursue civil action to recover the funds. It won't be quick and it won't be easy, but yes, there's a path to restitution. I want to contact them, my mother said. All of them. I want them to know they're not alone. I want them to know what happened wasn't their fault. We'll arrange that, Detective Martinez said. Once we've made arrests and the case is public, we'll facilitate a meeting. These women deserve to know the truth. They deserve to be believed. Richard Blackwell was arrested 6 days later. Detective Martinez called to tell us, though we'd already seen it on the news. The arrest happened at his office, in front of his employees, with cameras rolling. The media had gotten wind of the investigation and were waiting. The footage showed Richard, usually so composed and confident, being led out in handcuffs with his lawyer hurrying behind, shouting, "No comment," at every question. The charges were extensive. Multiple counts of fraud. Wire fraud. Conspiracy. Racketeering. Witness intimidation. Assault. The bail was set at $2 million. He posted it within hours, but the damage was done. His reputation was destroyed. His business was under investigation. His clients were fleeing. The life he had built on the backs of women he'd manipulated was crumbling. My mother watched the news coverage in silence. I couldn't read her expression. "How do you feel?" I asked. She thought for a moment. "I feel like I can breathe again," she said finally. "For 6 months, I've been carrying this weight. This fear. This constant calculation of how to survive him. And now it's over. He can't hurt me anymore. He can't hurt anyone anymore." "You did that," I said. "You stopped him." "We did that," she corrected. "You, me, Patricia, Detective Martinez, Lisa Chen, Jennifer, Patricia Williams, all the women who had the courage to come forward. We did it together." The trial wouldn't happen for months, maybe over a year. These things take time. But the outcome was no longer in doubt. The evidence was overwhelming. Richard's own records had convicted him. In the meantime, my mother's business was safe. The forged documents Richard had threatened to release were proven to be fraudulent. The Attorney General's office issued a public statement clearing her of any wrongdoing. Her clients stood by her. In fact, several reached out to offer additional work, impressed by her courage in coming forward. I was so afraid this would destroy everything I'd built, my mother told me one evening as we packed to finally go home. But it didn't. If anything, people respect me more now. Not for being a victim, but for fighting back. "You're not a victim," I said. "You're a survivor. And a hero to all those other women." She smiled. "I don't know about hero. But maybe I can be an example. Maybe I can show other women that you don't have to suffer in silence. That asking for help isn't weakness. That fighting back is possible." We flew home the next day. Back to Wisconsin. Back to our quiet street with the blue-shuttered house. Mrs. Patterson came over with a casserole, as she always did. Mr. Chen shoveled our driveway even though it was spring and there was no snow. Everything was familiar. Normal. Safe. But something had changed. My mother had changed. And so had I. The months that followed were a strange mix of normal life and ongoing legal proceedings. My mother went back to work, meeting with clients, managing projects, running her business. But she also spent time meeting with other survivors, building a support network, planning the nonprofit she wanted to start. I went back to my job in Minneapolis, but I came home every other weekend. My mother and I talked more than we ever had before. Real conversations about feelings, fears, dreams, regrets. We were rebuilding our relationship on a foundation of honesty instead of stoic silence. 3 months after Richard's arrest, Patricia Chen organized a meeting of all the women who had come forward. 12 of them in total. Some had been on Richard's spreadsheet. Others had found out about the case through media coverage and realized they had been targeted too, even if they had managed to escape before he fully ensnared them. The meeting was held in a conference room at Patricia's law office. As I looked around the room, I saw women of all ages. Different backgrounds. Different industries. But they all had the same expression, a mixture of relief and residual pain. Relief that they were finally believed. Pain from what they had endured. My mother stood at the front of the room. She had prepared remarks but ended up speaking from the heart instead. "I want to start by saying I'm sorry," she said. "I'm sorry for what happened to all of us. I'm sorry it took so long for someone to stop him. I'm sorry you suffered alone, thinking it was your fault, thinking no one would believe you. But I also want to say thank you. Thank you for being brave enough to come forward. Thank you for adding your voices to this case. Because of you, Richard Blackwell will face justice. And because of you, other women will be warned. They'll know what to look for. They'll know they're not alone." Jennifer Rodriguez spoke next. "For 8 years, I thought I was the only one. I thought I was uniquely stupid for falling for his manipulation. But sitting in this room, seeing all of you, I realize it wasn't about intelligence. It wasn't about weakness. It was about a predator who knew exactly how to identify and exploit vulnerabilities. That's not our fault. That's his crime." One by one, the women shared their stories. Some cried. Some were angry. Some were just numb, still processing. But they all listened to each other. Validated each other. Believed each other. And in that room, something powerful happened. The isolation Richard had counted on, the silence he had weaponized, shattered. These women weren't victims anymore. They were survivors. And they were a community. Patricia Chen announced that she was filing a class-action civil lawsuit on behalf of all the survivors to recover the money Richard had stolen. She also announced that my mother was launching a non-profit organization called Business Women's Defense Network, dedicated to educating female entrepreneurs about predatory business practices, providing legal resources, and creating a support system for those who had been targeted. "This isn't just about Richard Blackwell," my mother said. "He's not the only one doing this. There are others. Men who see successful, independent women as opportunities to exploit. We need to create systems to protect each other. To share information. To call out predatory behavior before it destroys more lives." The room erupted in applause. After the meeting, several women approached my mother. They wanted to volunteer. They wanted to help build the organization. They wanted to turn their pain into purpose. "This is how we heal," Jennifer told me quietly. "Not by forgetting what happened, but by using it to protect others. By making sure Richard Blackwell is the last predator who can do this so easily." The trial began 9 months after Richard's arrest. It was held in a Chicago federal courthouse because some of the charges involved federal crimes. The prosecution had so much evidence they could have filled a library. The recordings. The spreadsheet. The forged documents. The testimony of 12 survivors. The financial records. The email threats. Everything. Richard's defense attorney tried to argue that it was all a misunderstanding. That the partnerships were legitimate. That the women had simply been bad at business. That Richard was being punished for being successful. But the evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours. Guilty on all counts. Fraud. Wire fraud. Conspiracy. Racketeering. Witness intimidation. Assault. When the verdict was read, I watched Richard's face. For the first time since I'd met him, the smile was gone. He just looked old. Defeated. Small. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks later. Richard's attorney pleaded for leniency. Argued that he had no prior criminal record. That he had contributed to his community. That he was sorry for any harm he had caused. The judge wasn't impressed. "Mr. Blackwell," the judge said, "you systematically targeted, manipulated, and financially destroyed 12 successful businesswomen over the course of 15 years. You preyed on their vulnerabilities. You exploited their trust. You stole their life's work. And you documented it all like it was some kind of game. This court has rarely seen such calculated, sustained, intentional harm. You showed no mercy to your victims. This court will show none to you." The sentence was 18 years in federal prison. Plus restitution to all the survivors. Plus forfeiture of his assets to pay back what he had stolen. Richard Blackwell, who had spent decades building power and wealth on the suffering of others, would spend the rest of his productive years behind bars. As we left the courthouse, reporters swarmed us. My mother had agreed to give a statement. She stood on the courthouse steps, Patricia Chen on one side, Jennifer Rodriguez on the other, me standing just behind her. "Today, justice was served," my mother said. Her voice was steady. Strong. "But this isn't just about one man going to prison. This is about a system that allowed him to operate for 15 years. This is about a culture that made women feel they couldn't speak up, couldn't ask for help, couldn't fight back. We need to change that culture. We need to create systems that protect women in business. And that's exactly what we're going to do." The media coverage was extensive. My mother's story, and the stories of the other survivors, were featured in newspapers, magazines, online publications. Some coverage was sensitive and thoughtful. Some was sensationalized. But the overall message got through. Women started reaching out from all over the country. "I think this happened to me too. I'm in a situation like this right now and I don't know what to do. Can you help me?" The Business Women's Defense Network, which had started as an idea in a hotel room, became a reality. Patricia Chen helped structure it legally. The survivors became board members and volunteers. Donations came in from women who had their own stories of being targeted in business. Within 6 months, the organization had a website, a hotline, a network of volunteer attorneys, educational resources, and partnerships with business schools and women's professional organizations. "We're creating what we needed," my mother told me. "A place where women can go when something feels wrong. Where they can get advice before it's too late. Where they can learn to recognize warning signs. And where they can find support if they've already been victimized." "You turned something terrible into something powerful," I said. "We all did," she corrected. "Every survivor who came forward. Every woman who shared her story. Every person who donated or volunteered. This is bigger than me. It's a movement." Life slowly returned to a new normal. My mother's business not only survived but thrived. Her courage in coming forward actually brought her more clients. Companies wanted to work with someone who had integrity, who stood up for what was right even when it was hard. I got that promotion at my tech startup. Moved into a better apartment. Started dating someone kind and genuine. But I also made sure to come home more often. To have those real conversations with my mother. To not let distance and busyness become excuses for disconnection. One evening, about a year after that night in the Chicago hotel, my mother and I sat on her porch drinking tea. It was early summer. Fireflies were starting to come out. The neighborhood was quiet and peaceful. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't shown up that night?" I asked. She was quiet for a moment. "All the time," she said. "I don't know if I would have found the courage to fight back on my own. I was so deep in survival mode, so focused on managing the situation, that I might have just kept going along with Richard's demands until it was too late. You showing up, you being there, it changed something. It reminded me that I wasn't alone. That I didn't have to handle everything by myself. I almost didn't come, I admitted. I almost just sent a text asking if you were okay. I almost convinced myself I was being overprotective. But you trusted your instincts, she said. You listened to that voice that said something was wrong. That's important. That's what I want women to learn from our story. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. And ask for help. Don't wait until you're drowning to reach out. How are you doing now? I asked. Really doing? She thought about it. I'm healing, she said. Not healed. Healing. There are still days when I replay everything in my head. Days when I wonder if I could have stopped Richard sooner. Days when I feel angry that I had to go through any of this. But there are also days when I feel strong. Proud. Hopeful. The nonprofit is growing. We're helping women. We're making a difference. That gives me purpose beyond just my own recovery. And personally. Are you okay? She smiled. I'm learning to be okay with not always being okay. I'm in therapy now. Did I tell you that? I shook my head. I started a few months ago. At first, I thought it was silly. I'm strong. I don't need therapy. But then I realized that's exactly the kind of thinking that got me into trouble in the first place. The belief that asking for help makes you weak. So now I go every week. And I'm learning a lot about myself. About patterns I've carried since childhood. About how losing your father affected me in ways I never processed. About how I used work and self-sufficiency as armor to avoid vulnerability. That's really brave, Mom, I said. She laughed. It doesn't feel brave. It feels hard. But I think that's what real bravery is. Not the dramatic confrontations. Just the daily work of being honest with yourself and others. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the fireflies dance in the twilight. Then my mother said, I want to tell you something. Something I've never said out loud before. I waited. When your father died, I made a decision. I decided that I would never let you see me weak. Never let you see me struggling. I thought I was protecting you. I thought I was showing you how to be strong. But what I actually did was teach you that vulnerability is something to hide. That needing help is shameful. And I'm sorry for that. I felt tears prick my eyes. Mom, you were grieving. You were doing your best. I was, she agreed. But that doesn't mean I did everything right. And I want you to know that you don't have to be like me. You don't have to carry everything alone. You don't have to wait until you're at a breaking point to ask for support. You're allowed to be human. You're allowed to need people. That's not weakness. That's wisdom. I'm learning that, I said. Watching you go through this, watching you finally accept help and build community, that's taught me more than anything you could have said. Good, she said. Then maybe something worthwhile came from all this pain. The impact of the case extended far beyond the 12 women who testified. In the months following Richard's conviction, 3 more men were arrested for similar schemes in different states. Apparently, Richard's trial had emboldened other victims to come forward, and prosecutors were taking these cases more seriously. The Business Women's Defense Network started getting calls from prosecutors asking for expert testimony about predatory business practices. My mother became an advocate, speaking at conferences, writing articles, consulting with law enforcement on how to identify and investigate these types of crimes. She was invited to testify before a state legislative committee considering new laws to protect small business owners from predatory partnerships. I never imagined I'd be doing this, she told me after one particularly long day of meetings and interviews. Running my consulting business was enough. But this feels important. Like I'm using the worst experience of my life to prevent other women from going through the same thing. The civil lawsuit Patricia Chen had filed also succeeded. After months of legal wrangling, a settlement was reached. Richard's assets were liquidated, his business dissolved, and the money distributed among the survivors. It wasn't full restitution. After legal fees and the reality that some of the money had been spent or hidden, each woman received back about 60 to 70% of what they had lost. But it was something. It was acknowledgement. It was validation. Jennifer Rodriguez used her settlement to start a new business. A consulting firm specifically for women entrepreneurs. "I'm taking what Richard tried to destroy and rebuilding it stronger," she told us at a survivors group meeting. "He wanted to prove that women couldn't succeed in business. I'm going to prove him wrong every single day." Patricia Williams used her money to go back to school. She had always wanted to get a master's degree but couldn't afford it after Richard destroyed her business. Now she was studying social work, planning to specialize in helping victims of financial abuse. "There's so much overlap between financial abuse in intimate relationships and what Richard did in business contexts," she explained. "The same manipulation tactics. The same isolation. The same shame that keeps victims silent. I want to help people recognize it earlier and escape faster." The survivors stayed in touch. They formed a private online group where they could support each other, celebrate victories, and process setbacks. Some became close friends. Others remained more distant but appreciative of the connection. But they were all united by shared experience and collective healing. "This is what Richard never understood," my mother said at one of our monthly gatherings. "He thought he could isolate us. Divide us. Keep us ashamed and silent. But trauma, when shared, loses its power. And survivors, when connected, become unstoppable. He created his own downfall by hurting so many of us. Because eventually, we found each other. And together, we were stronger than he ever was." About 18 months after that night in Chicago, I noticed something had fundamentally shifted in my relationship with my mother. We were no longer operating in our old dynamic where she was the invincible protector and I was the protected child. We had become something different. Partners. Equals. Friends. I started asking her advice about things I would have previously kept to myself. Work challenges. Relationship questions. Financial decisions. And she started doing the same with me. Not because she needed my permission or approval, but because she valued my perspective. She saw me as an adult whose opinion mattered. One weekend when I was home, she told me she had started dating someone. I was surprised. Not because I didn't think she should date, but because she had been so focused on work and the nonprofit that I hadn't imagined she had time for a personal life. "His name is David," she said. "He's a professor at the university. We met at a fundraiser for the nonprofit. He teaches business ethics, actually. He reached out after the trial because he wanted to use the case as an example in his classes. We started talking, and then we started having coffee, and then it became more than that. How do you feel about it?" I asked. She smiled, and it was a genuine smile. Lighter than I'd seen in years. Terrified, she admitted. But also happy. "David is nothing like Richard. Nothing like your father either, actually. He's just himself. Kind, thoughtful, a little awkward. He makes me laugh. And he knows everything that happened. I told him early on because I didn't want any secrets. And he didn't run away. He just listened and said, 'Thank you for trusting me with that.' I'd like to meet him," I said. "Really?" She looked pleased. "You're not upset." "Why would I be upset?" "Mom, you deserve to be happy. You deserve companionship and love and all the good things. Dad's been gone for almost 20 years. You've been alone long enough." She teared up slightly. "I wasn't sure how you'd feel about me moving on." "I feel like it's about time," I said firmly. "And I'm glad you found someone who appreciates how amazing you are." I met David the following month. He was exactly as she described. Mid-50s, gray hair, warm eyes, a professor's slightly rumpled style. He asked me thoughtful questions about my work, my life, my interests. He didn't try too hard to impress me or win me over. He was just genuinely interested in getting to know me because I mattered to my mother. After dinner, as he and I cleaned up while my mother took a phone call from Patricia about the nonprofit, David said, "Your mother is an extraordinary person." "I know," I said. "I'm glad she has you." He smiled. "I'm the lucky one. She's been through hell and came out stronger. That takes real courage. I just hope I can support her the way she deserves." I decided I liked him. Not because he was perfect, but because he saw my mother clearly and loved her anyway. Because he didn't try to fix her or save her or complete her. He just walked beside her. 2 years after that night in the Chicago hotel, the Business Women's Defense Network held its first annual conference. Over 300 women attended. Entrepreneurs, lawyers, advocates, survivors. The keynote speaker was supposed to be a prominent businesswoman, but at the last minute, that speaker had to cancel due to a family emergency. My mother was asked to step in. I watched from the audience as she took the stage. She wore a navy suit, professional but not stiff. Her hair, now with more gray than she used to cover up, was pulled back simply. She looked confident. Settled. At peace. 2 years ago, she began, I was standing in a hotel room, terrified. A man was threatening to destroy everything I had built. And I felt completely alone. I had spent so many years believing that strength meant handling everything by myself. That asking for help was weakness. That vulnerability was dangerous. And that belief nearly destroyed me. She paused, looking out at the audience. But then something happened. My daughter showed up. She knocked on my door. She refused to leave. She reminded me that I didn't have to fight alone. And that changed everything. Not because she fixed the problem for me, but because she stood beside me. She witnessed my fear and my struggle and she didn't look away. In this room right now are women at different stages of their journeys. Some of you are building successful businesses and want to protect what you've created. Some of you are recovering from predatory partnerships or financial abuse. Some of you are still in the middle of difficult situations and aren't sure how to escape. But all of you have something in common. You're here. You showed up. You're refusing to suffer in silence. And that takes incredible courage. The audience was completely silent. You could feel the attention, the connection. The Business Women's Defense Network exists because 12 women were brave enough to come forward and tell the truth about what happened to them. Because we refused to let shame keep us silent. Because we understood that our individual stories were part of a larger pattern. And because we believed that by sharing what we learned, we could protect others. She clicked to the next slide, which showed statistics about the nonprofit's impact. In 2 years, we've provided free legal consultations to over 400 women. We've helped identify and report 6 additional cases of predatory business practices. We've created educational resources that have reached over 50,000 entrepreneurs. We've built a community of survivors who support each other. And we've changed laws in 3 states to better protect small business owners from coercive partnerships. The audience applauded. My mother waited for it to quiet before continuing. But the most important thing we've done is change the conversation. We've made it okay to admit when something feels wrong. We've made it acceptable to ask for help before you're drowning. We've created a culture where women don't have to choose between being successful and being vulnerable. You can be both. You should be both. Because real strength isn't about never needing anyone. Real strength is about building connections that make you more resilient when challenges come. She told the story of that night in Chicago. Not in dramatic, sensationalized terms, but honestly. The fear. The shame. The realization that she had let pride isolate her. The moment her daughter knocked on the door and everything changed. "I want to tell you something I wish someone had told me years ago," she said. "Your worth is not determined by how much you can carry alone. Your strength is not measured by how little you need from others. And your success is not diminished when you admit you're struggling. Some of the strongest people I know are the ones who are honest about their limitations, who build teams and communities, who ask for help before they're desperate." She shared some of the lessons she'd learned. How to recognize warning signs of predatory business relationships. Red flags like partners who isolate you from other advisors, who pressure you to make quick decisions without proper review, who use personal information as leverage, who gradually increase control while diminishing your autonomy. How to protect yourself. Get everything in writing. Have contracts reviewed by independent attorneys. Maintain relationships with mentors and advisors outside the partnership. Trust your instincts. Document everything. And most importantly, how to ask for help. "This is the hardest one for many of us," she said. "We're achievers. We're used to solving our own problems. But predatory people count on that pride. They count on your reluctance to admit you're in over your head. So practice asking for help before you need it desperately. Build your support network when things are good so it's there when things are bad. And remember that needing help doesn't make you weak. It makes you human." The speech ended with a standing ovation. Women came up to her afterward, some crying, some angry, some just needing to be heard. She listened to every single one. Made time for everyone who needed it. And I watched her do what she was born to do. Not just run a successful business, but use her experience to lift others up. That evening, after the conference, my mother and I went back to the hotel where we had stayed 2 years earlier. Not the same one where the confrontation happened. We both agreed we never wanted to set foot in that place again. But a different hotel, nicer, with a view of the Chicago River. We sat in her room, ordered room service, and talked about how far we'd come. "Do you remember what you said to me that night?" my mother asked. "Which part?" "You said, you don't have to ask for help, Mom. I'm here now. And we're going to fix this." You said it so simply. Like it was obvious. Like there was no question that we would face it together. "Because there wasn't a question," I said. "You're my mother. Of course I was going to help you. But I had spent so many years teaching you that I didn't need help," she said. Modeling self-sufficiency to an unhealthy degree. "The fact that you still showed up, still insisted on being there, that's not because of what I taught you. That's despite it. That's who you are. And I'm so grateful for that." We were both quiet for a moment. Then I said something I'd been thinking about for months. "I want to tell you something I've never said. After Dad died, I used to lie awake at night listening to you cry. You thought you were being quiet. You thought I couldn't hear you. But I could. And I felt so helpless. I was 12 years old and I didn't know how to help you. I didn't know what to say or do. So I just pretended I didn't hear. And I've carried guilt about that for years." My mother looked shocked. "You heard me. Every night for months," I said. "And I did nothing. I just let you suffer alone because I didn't know what else to do." She reached over and took my hand. "Sweetheart, you were a child. It wasn't your job to comfort me. It was my job to protect you from seeing how much pain I was in. If anything, I should have been more open with you. Should have told you it was okay to grieve together. But I thought I was being strong by hiding it. We both thought strength meant hiding pain," I said. "Turns out we were both wrong." She laughed, a slightly watery sound. "Yes. We were. But we learned. Maybe later than we should have, but we learned." "What do you think Dad would think?" I asked. "About all of this. About Richard and the trial and the nonprofit. About you and David. About everything." My mother thought about it. I think he'd be proud. Your father always wanted me to believe in myself more. To take up more space. To not apologize for being successful. He used to say, Margaret, you're allowed to be powerful and still need people. Those things aren't opposites. I didn't really understand what he meant then. But I do now. I miss him, I said. Me too, she replied. Every day. But I think he'd be happy knowing that his death didn't destroy us. That we survived it. That we eventually learned to thrive again. And that we're using what we learned to help others. As we sat there in that Chicago hotel room, so different from the one 2 years earlier but somehow bringing everything full circle, I asked my mother what she would tell her younger self if she could go back in time. She thought about it carefully. I would tell her that the mask of invincibility she's wearing is going to become a prison, she said slowly. I would tell her that the strong independent woman persona she's building, while valuable in many ways, is going to isolate her when she needs connection most. I would tell her to let people in. To show vulnerability. To build relationships based on authenticity rather than projected strength. What else? I would tell her to trust her instincts earlier. When Richard first contacted me, I felt uneasy. But I talked myself out of it. Told myself I was being paranoid. Told myself people deserve second chances. But my gut knew something was wrong from the beginning. I just didn't listen. So I'd tell my younger self to trust that inner voice. It's usually right. And about asking for help. I'd tell her that asking for help isn't a sign of failure, she said. It's a sign of wisdom. It's a sign that you understand your limitations and you're smart enough to bring in reinforcements. The most successful people aren't the ones who do everything alone. They're the ones who build strong teams, who delegate, who know when to call in experts. I'd tell her to practice asking for small things so it's easier when you need to ask for big things. I nodded. What about me? What would you tell your younger self about parenting me after Dad died? She looked at me with such tenderness. I would tell her to let you see her cry. To let you see her struggle and recover. Because by hiding all that, she's teaching you that emotions are weaknesses to be concealed rather than normal human experiences to be processed. I would tell her that you're strong enough to handle seeing her be human. And that you'll actually be stronger for it because you'll learn that it's okay to not be okay sometimes. I think I turned out all right, I said lightly. You turned out better than all right, she said. You turned out empathetic, strong, capable, and emotionally intelligent. And that's not because of my parenting. That's despite my parenting in some ways, and because of your own nature. But if I could do it over, I'd be more honest with you. I'd cry with you instead of in secret. I'd tell you when I was scared or overwhelmed. I'd model healthy vulnerability instead of stoic independence. We talked late into the night. About pain and healing. About strength and vulnerability. About motherhood and daughterhood. About the ways we'd hurt each other unintentionally and the ways we'd saved each other deliberately. About regrets and gratitudes. About the past and the future. And somewhere in those hours of honest conversation, I realized something profound. The woman sitting across from me wasn't just my mother anymore. She was a whole person. Complex, flawed, brave, scared, powerful, vulnerable. She was everything a human being is supposed to be. And I loved her not despite those contradictions but because of them. Thank you, I said finally. For what? For letting me knock on the door that night. For letting me in. For letting me see you as a whole person instead of just as my invincible mother. For teaching me, even if you learned it later than you wanted to, that real strength includes vulnerability. She smiled. Thank you for knocking. For refusing to leave. For standing beside me. For being the kind of daughter who trusts her instincts and shows up even when it's inconvenient. You saved me that night. You know that, right? We saved each other, I said. And I meant it. The next morning, we had breakfast with Patricia Chen and Jennifer Rodriguez. It had become a tradition whenever we were all in Chicago at the same time. The four of us meeting, sharing updates, supporting each other. Patricia brought news about another case. A woman in Michigan who had reached out to the nonprofit describing a situation that sounded eerily similar to what Richard had done. She's been in a partnership for 8 months, Patricia explained. Started noticing inconsistencies about 4 months in. Red flags like missing money, contracts that don't match verbal agreements, increasing pressure to sign over more control. But she's been documenting everything. She called our hotline before it got really bad. That's exactly what we hoped for, my mother said. That women would recognize the warning signs earlier and reach out before they were completely trapped. She wants to meet with you, Patricia said to my mother. She said reading your story gave her the courage to trust her instincts. She wants advice on how to extricate herself from the partnership safely. Of course I'll meet with her, my mother said immediately. When? This afternoon if you're available. She drove down from Grand Rapids this morning. She's that eager to get help. I'm available, my mother said firmly. Jennifer smiled. This is what it's all about, isn't it? We went through hell so other women don't have to. Or at least so they know they're not alone if they do. Do you ever regret it? I asked. Coming forward, going through the trial, all of it. Jennifer thought about it. The trial was brutal, she said honestly. Having to recount everything Richard did, being cross-examined by his attorney, hearing him paint me as a failed businesswoman who blamed others for her mistakes. That part was awful. But no, I don't regret it. Because 8 years of carrying that shame alone was worse than any courtroom experience. And knowing that my testimony helped convict him, helped protect other women, that makes it worth it. I feel the same way, my mother said. The whole process was difficult. Exhausting. Sometimes humiliating. But the alternative, staying silent, letting Richard continue to hurt others, that would have been unbearable. This way, at least something good came from something terrible. Patricia nodded. Every woman who calls our hotline, every person who recognizes warning signs because of your stories, every predator who thinks twice because they know we're watching, that's your legacy. That's what you created by being brave enough to speak up. It's what we all created, my mother corrected. None of this would have worked if just one person came forward. It was the collective voice that made the difference. That's what I want women to understand. You don't have to be a solo hero. You just have to be one voice joining others. That's how real change happens. The meeting that afternoon with the woman from Michigan went well. My mother spent 3 hours with her, reviewing her documentation, connecting her with legal resources, helping her create a safe exit strategy from the predatory partnership. I watched my mother in action and saw something I'd never quite seen before. Purpose. Not just professional competence, which she'd always had, but a deeper sense of calling. She had found meaning in her suffering. How did it go? I asked afterward. She's going to be okay, my mother said. She caught it early enough. She documented everything. She has a good attorney. And most importantly, she's not alone. She knows there are resources and people who believe her. That makes all the difference. You're really good at this, I said. At what? At taking your pain and using it to help others. At turning your worst experience into your greatest contribution. That's a real gift. She looked thoughtful. I don't know if it's a gift so much as a choice. Pain is inevitable. We all experience it. But what we do with that pain, that's up to us. We can let it make us bitter and closed off. Or we can let it make us compassionate and open. I'm trying to choose the latter. You're doing more than trying, I said. You're succeeding. Now I want to ask you something. Really think about this. We've come to the end of this story, but maybe it's made you think about your own life. About your own relationships. About the masks you wear and the help you don't ask for. My mother almost lost everything because she believed strength meant suffering alone. She almost let a predator destroy her because she was too proud to admit she was in over her head. But she also found her way out. Not by being perfect or having all the answers, but by finally letting someone stand beside her. By finally admitting she needed help. By finally understanding that vulnerability isn't weakness. So here's what I want you to ask yourself: is there someone in your life who's wearing a mask of invincibility? Someone who always seems to have it together, who never complains, who handles everything alone. Maybe it's your mother. Your sister. Your friend. Your colleague. Maybe it's you. Because here's what I learned from all of this. The people who seem strongest are often the ones struggling most. The people who never ask for help are often the ones who need it most desperately. And the people who always have it together are often one crisis away from falling apart. What would you have done if you were in my place that night? If you had a nagging feeling that something was wrong with someone you loved? Would you have trusted your instincts and shown up? Or would you have talked yourself out of it, convinced yourself you were overreacting, sent a text instead of getting on a plane? And if you're the one wearing the mask, the one carrying everything alone, what's stopping you from taking it off? What are you afraid will happen if people see you're struggling? What's the worst that could happen if you ask for help? I can tell you from experience, the worst thing is not asking. The worst thing is suffering alone when you don't have to. The worst thing is letting pride become a prison. My mother is thriving now. Her business is successful. Her nonprofit is growing. She's in a healthy relationship. She has a community of women who support her and whom she supports. She has a daughter who actually knows her, really knows her, not just the strong facade she used to present. But none of that would have happened if she'd kept walking the path she was on. None of that would have happened if she'd continued to believe that strength meant never needing anyone. 2 years after that night in the Chicago hotel, I can say with certainty that knocking on my mother's door was the best decision I ever made. Not because I saved her. She saved herself. But because I was there when she needed someone to stand beside her. Because I refused to let her face her nightmare alone. Because I trusted my instincts and showed up. And here's what I want you to know: you can be that person for someone in your life. You can knock on the door. You can refuse to accept the facade. You can stand beside someone who's struggling. You can be the voice that says, you don't have to do this alone. Or if you're the one who needs help, you can open the door. You can take off the mask. You can admit you're struggling. You can ask for support. Because on the other side of that vulnerability is connection. Community. Healing. Freedom. The night I knocked on my mother's hotel door, I heard fear. I heard pain. I heard the sound of a woman at her breaking point. But I also heard, eventually, courage. I heard resilience. I heard the sound of someone choosing to fight back instead of suffering in silence. And that's the sound I want you to remember from this story. Not the crash of breaking glass or the threats of a predator. But the sound of a daughter refusing to walk away. The sound of a mother finally admitting she needed help. The sound of survivors finding their voices. The sound of a community forming from shared pain. The sound of transformation. Because that's what this story is really about. Not about Richard Blackwell and his crimes. He's just one predator in a world full of them. This story is about the moment we choose connection over isolation. The moment we choose honesty over facade. The moment we choose to ask for help instead of drowning alone. My mother made that choice. The other survivors made that choice. I made that choice when I knocked on that door. And you can make that choice too. In your own life. In your own way. With your own struggles. So let me ask you one more time, who needs you to knock on their door? Who needs you to refuse to accept their, I'm fine? Who needs you to stand beside them? And if you're the one behind the closed door, suffering in silence, wearing the mask of strength while crumbling inside. Who can you let in? Who can you trust with the truth? Who will stand beside you if you just open the door? Now I want to hear from you. What would you have done if you were in my place that night in Chicago? Would you have gotten on that plane? Would you have knocked on that door? And have you ever had a moment where your instincts told you something was wrong with someone you loved? Did you trust those instincts? Share your thoughts in the comments. Tell me your story. Because maybe someone reading your comment is behind a closed door right now, wondering if they should ask for help. Maybe someone is wearing a mask of strength, thinking they're the only one who struggles. Maybe someone needs to hear that they're not alone. Your story, your voice, your experience, it matters. It could be the thing that gives someone else the courage to open their door. To take off their mask. To ask for help. And if this story touched you, if it made you think differently about strength and vulnerability, about asking for help and offering it, then please subscribe. Because there are more stories coming. More truths that need to be told. More moments of transformation that deserve to be shared. We're building a community here. A community of people who understand that real strength includes vulnerability. That courage sometimes looks like admitting you're struggling. That the bravest thing you can do is ask for help before you're drowning. My mother's story could have ended very differently that night in Chicago. If I hadn't shown up, if she hadn't finally admitted she needed help, if she hadn't been brave enough to fight back, Richard Blackwell might still be out there, targeting women, destroying lives, collecting his trophies. But that's not how it ended. It ended with justice. With healing. With community. With transformation. And it started with a simple act, a daughter knocking on a door. A mother opening it. And both of them choosing connection over isolation. So I'll leave you with this: trust your instincts. Check on the people you love. Ask for help when you need it. Offer it when you can. Build communities of support. Tell the truth about your struggles. Because on the other side of that vulnerability, on the other side of that honest admission that we don't have it all together, that we need each other, that we're all just humans doing our best, on that side is freedom. Connection. Healing. Hope. Thank you for staying with this story from beginning to end. Thank you for caring about my mother's journey. Thank you for being part of this community. And remember, strength isn't about never needing anyone. Strength is about building connections that make you resilient when life gets hard. Drop a comment. Subscribe. And most importantly, check on the people you love. You never know who's behind a closed door, struggling in silence, waiting for someone to knock.